Okay, it is 6:01, and I will call our meeting of Charter and Ordinance to session. Let's stand for the pledge, please. I
pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Roll call, please.
Delaney.
Here.
Kinnaman.
Here.
Powers. Here.
Very good. Just to do a short review again, this matter was brought to us by the Village Council by motion for the Charter and Ordinance Committee to draft documents for allowing marijuana facilities within the Village of Holly. Those discussions began back in at least August and have had presentations in Village Council, and then we are in our third meeting of the Charter and Ordinance. We started with presentations and hearing reasoning from staff on the reasons to move forward with this. Then our second meeting was to begin hashing over a little bit of some documents. We settled on one document that we thought would be a good bones for what we were looking to work from, and tasked the staff with drafting that into Hollyese, into our language, and bring that back to us to then allow us to begin to review some of those things, review this document as our own then tonight, and we will see how far we get, and if we feel we need a fourth meeting, or if we make it through things tonight, but we'll start discussion. I've asked our staff to serve more as a panel tonight, and because each of them have worked on different parts and have then compiled this together, and so I'd like us to work that kind of as a discussion as a panel, questions that we have for them as a panel, and if someone in particular worked on a section or had input in making that happen, and we have questions about it, then I'd like that individual to kind of do bring us up to speed, or talk about why that is important to be in there. I want to thank Mr. Gildner for being here tonight. We are moving into that legal form of things, and I think it's important that you're kind of hearing and can dialogue with us as well if there are things that we are questioning, or that you feel should be addressed as we move forward. So with that said, if we want to, I think we're going to kind of just almost page by page. We're not going to read the whole thing. We're going to go, let's start at the beginning, and if you have questions that have come up as you've looked at it, then let's look at those things and do discussion on them, and just kind of work through it in pieces that way, okay? So if we want to begin, we notice we have some blanks because we will be filling in point items on page 2, and so anything though from page 1 that kind of caught your attention?
They refer to it as marijuana. Should
okay.
Refer to it as
I'm still on this page.
Oh.
You're jumping ahead of me.
Okay.
I'm on the point system.
Okay.
Let's just start there. Those are our first pages, and on the very beginning, I circled something where it talks about the number of extra pages, supplemental materials. And it says 10, but it has 1 in parentheses. Is that 1 in parentheses supposed to be a 10, referring to the word 10?
Senator, I do not recall. I'm sorry. I've always wanted to say that when this kind of layout here. It's better than pleading the fifth.
It's those, sometimes it's those little things that just jump out at you like, okay.
I think that should be a
It
0.
proves I read it, right?
Yeah, I think it should. Yeah, that should be a 0 next to a 10.
Is that what you guys think that should have been? Are we referring to supplemental materials limited to no more than 10 pages, actual number 10?
Now that,
for each category.
and again, this
Or
was
is
taken.
or is it 10 supplemental documents, maximum 1 page each, for a total of 10 pages?
10 pages for each category, right?
That's how I
So,
read it
so
also.
they could submit 100 pages of
They could.
supplemental
Where are we now?
documents.
'Cause
Okay.
Right here, second paragraph.
I mean, according to this.
Right, that's what I'm wanting us to maybe clarify a little bit. We don't have to fix that in the moment, but that's something, when, you know, Mr. Geldner, when you're doing a, write-up for us here to see if is there clarification that makes that feel more right? If it's just that it's supposed to be 10, then that's fine.
Well, I think we have 16 now, right? That's each one of these categories. So what this means, the way I think what it means, is this first page is pass and fail to get you to the second page. But there are, because remember, these are
So they could submit
blended.
10 pages on each category. So on each of those 16 things, they could submit 10 pages of supplemental documentation.
That's not how I took it. I took it to say that there was, it says here 10, but there really is, the way that Chief Narsh narrowed it down, now we have, or expanded it, I guess, we now have 16 instead of 10 categories to rank. And that's why the blanks, because we don't know, it's 0 points, but we don't know how many points, the point value you would all want to give each one of these classifications.
So we may need an English major more than an attorney for this, but
I think maybe.
I mean, I think that you're on the right track, Richard. I think, and Ryan, I think what it refers to is the way it's written now, that you can have
10 pages for each one?
10 for each category.
Okay.
So in theory, you could have 160 pages.
Right.
Now,
Right.
whether you really need 10 or not, I don't think that that's even something that the attorney would be able to say, yeah, 10 is the right number. It's really what you
Yeah,
all
I
want
think
to
this
say.
is kind of saying, okay, if you're submitting more than 10 pages worth of stuff for any, and it's not limiting them to, you know, you can only submit supplemental documentation for like 3 or 5 or whatever. But, you know, when you do submit documentation, there's a limit to it being overkill.
And I think that was the intent, was to set the limit, because some of these categories, if they do provide a supplemental, might be 1 page, but some, by the technicality
Right,
of the category, we're limiting them to 10.
right. Yeah, so we probably wanted to say the digit 10, 10,
Yes.
okay? Some of these other places that are talking about points and the number of categories, I think, gets determined when we turn the page and look at that. But let's go through these couple of items on here. First, the requirements. I know we had talked about those, that we wanted that section in there. And I think this came from a different set than the ones that we built this off from. So as we're looking at this as a committee, do those seem to answer what we wanted them to in that section?
And I might add that, and again, the group that worked on these, we looked at these, all of us together. The bottom, when their grow facilities have disclosed chemical wastewater disposal methods. Some of them have points on the inside when you get in there, but looking at that pass-fail coming in, that was important because we maintain a wastewater treatment plant, and with some of the substances that could be in there, that was elevated to the level we felt for the Village of Holly to be a pass-fail, quite so, honestly.
Right.
So these were a culmination of the different
Okay.
ones, and some were made just for us.
Good.
So this requirement section came from the City of Berkeley
Yeah.
ordinance, and I'm looking at my notes from our last meeting, and a couple of things that we had talked about was, in that second requirement, I noted houses of worship, which we have, and I think we wanted to add
The
did we want to add
residences,
residential,
and
or
I
did
think we
say-
ended up having that discussion, and, well, there was a fourth, parks we took off of there. We did have residences or residential that we left on there. Now, one of the things, that's been brought, at least to my attention, is that by doing residential, we virtually have no commercial properties that are not
Okay.
next door to
Okay.
residential properties.
Mhm.
And so, we either need to have a really low number, for space, for distance from residential, or we need to eliminate that one. I might ask Mr. Gildner, in other ordinances that you have seen, or worked on, what has been typical in that scenario?
I haven't seen a typical because, of course, every community
Right.
is different. The universal is there's some locational restriction, usually from residential. But I can't tell you that the typical is 50 feet or 100 feet or 300 feet. Because as I said, every community is different. So the primary thing is you can't put something in there that is essentially going to zone out this use, so that when you look at it, there's no place that would meet that requirement. Beyond
Right.
that, it's
Right.
really up to you.
Okay. Because I feel like if we don't put anything in there about residential, that it kind of leaves it open a little bit. Anybody else on the panel have a thought on that part?
When staff met prior to tonight, when we were going over all the ordinances, we had, of course, talked about what the committee had talked about restricting locations to commercial, NOC, commercial, or industrial, depending upon the license,
Right.
and prohibiting it from residential district, and prohibiting it from the commercial business district, which in all reality is the historic downtown.
Right.
As we continued a little more talk about that, and we wanted to get or offer this to you, maybe one way to accomplish getting where we want to be on the residential end is by also adding that wherever a license is permitted, the property itself has to be zoned correctly. Because as you said, most of our commercial spaces do abut to the sides or to the rear, residential. And so you may have a neighboring property, but if the property in question that is to be under consideration for licensing is zoned correctly, it still may be an appropriate use for that license.
Okay, good. So,
I would like to see a footage, 100 foot, 200
What if we put that in, but that, certain buffer types, you know, we have railroad tracks, we have major roads, that separate some of that kind of, you know, that cause natural or, artificially natural, barriers, or breaks. Does something like that?
Just another suggestion, which I like that. What if instead of having that on this page as a pass-fail, what if we give it a point value on the next page? If it's between 0 and 100 feet, you get 1 point. If it's 100 to 200, you get 3. You know, do some
Oh,
kind
so
of,
distancing we could use
use that as part of the points.
as scaled
Yeah.
rather than
It gives you a
just
bonus.
restricted.
Rather than pass or fail and not get into the meat of this thing, at least that way you would get, you know, you give you more points the further you were away. I don't know. Just
I like
another
that.
suggestion.
Yeah, I guess I would, from the perspective, and I know where council and the committee is trying to go, but would we have those same setbacks if a bar was coming in?
Good point.
I mean, a bar is going
Right.
to create much more noise and consternation, I think, to a neighborhood. So I think, kind of looking at it, and I think there's that, if residents come and cause concern, I know from personal observation that there have been projects and developments in other communities where they come with residential. They're buying the property and they're, you know, it's a lakefront piece of property and they're putting in condos and the dispensary in the front. I don't know that it's, I guess I'm more concerned that out of the overabundance of caution to how to address residents is that you literally zone yourself out if you put 100 foot, 200 foot, and then the size of the property, if they're looking at a Class B or a Class C operation, it doesn't fit because of the setback.
Right.
I just don't know that it, well, I am aware that they are in a lot of communities where they are like any other business in the strip mall. And the strip mall abuts residential, but you have just about every type of business in there. So I'm just more concerned of a requirement that would literally block out
2/3 of the village,
where is there really
you know?
that big a need. I mean, I'd rather live next door to a dispensary than a bar that's open till 2:30 in the morning with a lot of traffic and a lot of noise. So what is the purpose of I think, what is the intent and purpose of the buffer or the zoning? Is it smell? Is it light trespass? I think those could be done, as Chief McGee stated, maybe in the point system of if they are abutting within 100 to 200 feet of a residential area, that there is design attention to light trespass, sound trespass by
Well,
virtue.
those things are built into our zoning ordinances anyhow. The permitting process, you know, when we review site plans for a commercial property, there has to be, you know, those buffers built, either fences or vegetation. Lighting has to be done certain ways.
So that's kind of already
It's kind of
intrinsic
already
to
in
the process. And remember too, if you have X amount of testing facilities, which I think that's worthy of a conversation as we get to that point when we talk about how many licenses the village wants. But let's say you had 5 testing facilities, nobody's going to know they're even there. You know, you could have
Right.
2 testing facilities in a building this size. I mean, and it's no different than like a Quest Labs. So there would not be a reason to have that buffer. It's almost, it seems, more manufacturing, but if it's already in there, it sounds like it may be covered.
Right.
I guess that's just an observation to be careful, because if you put it in the ordinance and we put it in here, and then we might lock ourselves out.
Right. Mr. Watson, any thoughts?
Well, I think our planning and zoning ordinance covers it, just like you said, Mr. Kinnaman. We have photometric plans that are required through the planning commission. We have a pretty extensive site plan development with landscaping standards as well for trees and bushes. So I think we cover that side in the site plan review process.
Okay.
And I think also, I mean, as the chief alluded to a little bit, is with provisioning center, the retail end of it is, there is no consumption on site. So
Correct.
as opposed to a bar, you're not gonna have people going there, consuming, and then hanging out in the parking lot. I mean, they're going to go there, do whatever shopping they're going to do, and then leave the parking lot. So it's not gonna be that type of attractive nuisance like you might get at other businesses.
So that brings up the thought of consumption centers too. If we look at allowing consumption centers, if we want to look at that a little differently, then, and maybe when we get to consumption, we can review that.
Certainly.
Does that feel good, guys?
Yeah.
Okay. I know it's a lot of hashing over like minute things, but I think that's where we're at with some of this. Okay, let's turn the next page and look at the point values, the merit-based criteria. And this is where we need to determine some point values. If it feels like we're getting too bogged down in it, we will take a break from them, look at some other stuff, and see if other pieces come back and fill in some of that idea. So I think input is good from committee as well as from our panel on how you think point values might be valuable. I know the one placed them like in a hierarchical, some things were, their thing in the top of the list was, like 26 points, and then it went to 24 and 22 and 18 and went down like that. I don't know if we necessarily have to put our list in that kind of order, but we need to think of what we want valued the most, and those things should have the highest point values, whether they are subdivided or regular. Mr. Walker.
So as, in this first two pages, the scoring sheets,
Right.
so those were worked on primarily by the two chiefs, McGee and Nark, and then we as a group, staff committee, went over them again. And so these are recommendations that we have. Even after this was together, we had question on one of these, and we wanted to bring this to the committee's attention. You may
Sure.
have also, but if you look at 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, proposed development does not displace existing operational business in the village of Holly. And so I have some question in my own mind of whether really that's a good requirement or not. I mean, obviously other communities have it, that's where we brought it from. But I think it's something that we want to talk about, and I only say that because if we have a business in Holly, even though they are functioning and they're operating, maybe they're just getting by. Maybe they're getting to the end of their family life cycle with that business. And if they were to get a business opportunity, an offer from a business wanting to come and get a license, I mean, should we really say, well, nope, you already have an operating business, so we are not going to allow you to have your business displaced by one of these licenses? I really wonder if that's really, if nothing else, fair to restrict that. So, I mean, I'm kind of up in the air in it. With me personally, it wouldn't bother me to see that particular requirement gone from this section. But I mean, maybe somebody else on the committee has thoughts, or maybe I have thought. But really, whatever you prefer, but I wanted to bring that up to you.
I'd like to hear from committee first. Any thoughts on that one? I have thoughts, but I'm going to listen to you guys first.
I mean, that makes sense to me. I don't know why we would want to tie the hands of our existing business owners, if an opportunity came their way.
I would agree with Brian on that.
I'm thinking that it has validity, but maybe at a low point value. Maybe only like 1 point or something like that, so that it's not hugely restrictive, but yet it's going to make someone who is interested in locating an establishment here, that they're not just targeting an existing business and could drive a really viable business out just by sheer, money. That could also alter the fabric of the community. So I think it's got validity, but maybe on a lower scale. So maybe only like 1 point or something like that. Thoughts on that?
I would find that acceptable, yeah.
Absolutely, yeah.
So why don't we just put a 1 in that one? Yay, we got 1 out of the way. So the first box kind of has numbers already in it. Those kind of transferred, I think, from the other document, and I think those numbers are fine. Anybody else have a feeling that any of those should be modified?
Actually, those were left in error, but if, because the idea was to let the committee select, and certainly if you like those numbers, that's fine. It might be helpful to start with what is going to be your maximum and what is going to be your minimum. And if you want to, keep it in an even number for division, because you're going to go to a 70%
Right.
scoring, then maybe that 1 becomes a 2. But whatever the committee decides, and remember that the idea of this isn't just that these are things that are important to the Village of Holly, but you can steer your applicants and your licensees. As soon as they see this, they're going to know what's really important
Right.
to council.
Right.
But what's your maximum and what would your minimum be? And then do you want to keep your sub scores all at 5? That seemed to be what was going on in the others that we looked at.
Right.
The idea is if an applicant meets any of the categories, they get the total points of the category, but then if they meet the sub-scores, they get those total points. In other words, you wouldn't get a 3 out of 5 if it was pretty good. You're either going to get the 5, but if you meet this first section, you'll get, if it's a 20, and then the 5s would be extra. But maybe you want to look at what you guys would like to assess as a maximum minimum. I don't know if that would be helpful.
Well, if we're going with 70%, I don't know if we want to make the whole thing worth like 100 points maximum, if that's perfect score, 100 points, or if we want to just kind of, see, I kind of feel like let's kind of weight them and then
Sure.
see how it adds up.
And that's the
If it
last
comes
community.
to an 83 or a
Yeah.
94 or a 107, whatever.
And you can always calculate a percentage of,
Right.
One of them had a
Over
total
the
score
total.
of 272.
Yeah.
So that was,
Yeah.
but okay.
Which I think gets right,
But, yeah. Yeah.
I think it makes us try doing algebra rather than just math. And
Brian, you're up.
If you got 16 categories and you get 6 points each one, that's 96.
see
And also,
how that goes.
It seems, for the sake of the applicants, I mean, what will be most helpful is just seeing that, okay, we got categories, we got points assigned to each category, and those are kind of listed in descending order of importance, right? So they see right up front what's most important to
Right.
us and
Right.
what's not as much.
And that's how we set it up. And so the basic one that we're reviewing here was 315 points, and you had to have a 221 for your 70%. So it was a weird number. But then on the second page, we integrated some other numbers. We scratched some out, remember, and said we don't need this, we don't need that. But then we did add some other ones about, you know, the panic buttons and some other things that you'll see towards the
Right,
bottom.
yeah, I saw those. The last two are identical.
No?
Was there supposed to be a different one in that last spot?
Probably.
It may have been a copy and paste error. I don't think so. That could be just, that should have been,
It's just a duplicate.
yeah, it's just a duplicate. I think
Right.
it should have
So
been
we'd
cut
be at
off.
17 categories then, even if we take that one out.
I guess that one's important. You can ask it twice.
Yeah. If you can answer it, you get twice the points. And one time it could be worth 5, and the other time it could be worth 1. Pick which one you want to answer. So, basically, Chief McGee, you are saying that, as a committee, you kind of hierarchied these based on your, feeling of importance already?
Well, we started
Would you-
following their ranking,
Mhm.
and then Chief Narsh integrated some things more in the middle that he and I especially were sensitive to.
Okay, so my question yet is,
So yes. I
did
think
you
the answer is
already kind of put them
Pretty
in,
much.
in
pretty much.
your order of
Don't you think we did?
what you guys feel is most valuable to least important?
I'm going to be really honest here and say that there were some really important things that the chief brought up, and because I had room in a size box, I put it in there, because a lot of these were empty, because I adjusted out. So I think at the top, we kind of are, but I would really rather, I can recreate this in any order,
Right,
but
Yeah.
most of them are, but I wouldn't say from about halfway down, they're not. I just, simply because as I was typing, as we're talking, ooh, that box looks like it'll fit it, so I put it in the box I had there.
okay.
I can adjust the boxes and move them around, but I just thought we would do that here and let the committee determine, and then I'll recreate the document. So the most important is at the top, because the points are gonna determine that.
Yeah,
Right.
for sure. I would say from a manager's perspective, I mean, the second from the bottom, the new second to the bottom, the application demonstrates benefits to the community other than increasing taxable value.
Right,
To me, that's a really important one, because I think if we as a community are looking at that, I mean, that is
so
some important.
as I look at that too, though, that feels vague.
It is. Because
Um,
you could have different priorities.
Is it too vague?
That's my feeling too, I look at it, wow, that they can't.
Because remember, one of our concerns that we talked about was making it too subjective. And, you know, if it's, say we put 5 points on that, maybe Mrs. Biggers prefers parks over sidewalks, or or something like that. And so, yeah, if they're only going to plant a few trees, or if they're going to buy playground equipment, 5 points or no 5 points.
Well, I kind of look at it in this way though, so priorities may change over time for the village.
Right.
And if you place some hard priorities in this sheet, then you have the task of going in and actually changing the scoring sheet, which then could create a problem in the future if somebody says, well, I was scored differently than previously. Kind of my thinking on this was that if it's vague like that in this form, there's nothing stopping the council from saying, at this time, right now, these 5 issues, or 5 topics, are what's most important to us, because really, 4 or 6 years down the road, those could change.
Right.
And the individual council could change those, and then it would be scored for whatever the current priority of the council is.
And if I can have you look at number 7 up from the bottom, I think that may be similar to what we're talking about, but these have 2 different perspectives, I think. 7 up is the community outreach.
Infrastructure one?
Plan community outreach to make significant physical improvements to Village of Holly roads, infrastructure, parks, or publicly owned property or projects that would benefit the Village of Holly. I think a lot of licensees and applicants investigate the communities. They want to be a good business partner. And I think they do look and they know what's important to
So
that
are
community.
both of these doing similar things then? Or help me understand what you see as the difference in the 2 of them? And maybe that's the clarification that we might be looking for that helps differentiate them better.
Well, like Jerry said, the one is specific, listing out things, and the other one lets you go with if council's changes or the community changes and what they think is a priority, it gives you that flexibility, because you have a category that goes with what is important at the time they put the application in, where the other one is specific and spells out certain things that says, we're only gonna, we're gonna give you points for A, B, and C, but down here, if we feel that infrastructure is important, or police officers, or fire are important, we can say, this is what we want to direct. If you're gonna make a, improvement to one of those things, it allows you to do that and be more.
So where does the clarification for that come from at the time of application?
So I think that in the one farther up in the list, as Brian said,
Right.
it lists out specifically what they're looking for. So if they hit those areas within that box, they're gonna get the maximum points, whatever
Right.
council determines. With the other one, if the council determines, and I'll just throw something out there, only because it's a current project, that, hey, right now in this time in history, the depot relocation is really important to us. That then they can pull out those specific projects and list them in there for that. Because once the depot relocation is done, that no longer is gonna be a priority, so
Right.
you don't want that as a hard goal.
Right.
Should we make a list, so it's
I think the
an open
council
book?
should make
That's
those.
what I mean.
Right,
So it's an
but
open
so,
book test then, right?
Right, and so maybe that's what I'm saying, is there wording that goes in there maybe that says, as determined annually by council or something like that, that's the thing that takes it away from just being random subjectivity at the moment.
I think that would clarify it.
I think so too.
That's a good, that's a good recommendation.
Okay, do you like
Agree.
that idea?
Yeah.
Okay,
So we'd somehow have to incorporate the council's, a master list, for lack of a better term, of priorities.
What, I would imagine that would have to be an agenda
don't
item,
do that
say
around
every
budget time
January.
Budget
anyway,
time,
so
right.
we'd have
Right,
to
could be
revisit that list.
an agenda item, right, either every January or every,
July budget.
every new fiscal year, something like that. But, on an annual basis, that's just,
How would you like the wording on that changed? And is that applying to second from the bottom or this?
Second to the bottom.
right.
Okay.
I think maybe.
Benefits to the
You guys
community.
have kind of talked through it a little bit, but I think maybe if you say something to the effect, and Mr. Gilner will help us smooth it out, but, as recommended annually by council, effective each July 1st. And it could be the date, but July 1st for now.
Mhm.
Well, I was just thinking with January, if we pass this in December or January, when can we reasonably expect applications to start coming in? We would want to have those in
Sure.
place, right?
Yeah, well,
Yeah.
for your initial one, you have to have a startup. So that could be determined, but, you know,
How would an applicant know what is the wishes of the council?
Well, because when they pick up this list with the points, they're also gonna get a list or another document with the council's resolution in it. That's going
the
to say.
council resolution for
Okay.
2022 or fiscal year 22-23 is these 4 items or whatever. And that comes in their packet.
Would that also apply then to the planned community outreach, to make significant physical improvements, infrastructure, parks, publicly owned property, or projects that benefit the village? Technically, that would work for both of those?
No, I think it would be just the one. So the one would be true infrastructure,
Okay,
you know, roads, sidewalk, things like that. Then the other one would be special projects that the council feels has the greatest community benefit. Could be depot relocation, could be parks improvements, you know, it could be anything.
Yeah.
Should those two be side by side?
It depends on the point that you assess to them.
Yep. You have one that you're looking at all,
Not at the
or
moment.
a question, or think of point value? Or a hierarchy?
Well, I think we had discussed last time that we liked that first category pretty much as it was written.
Yep.
And I'm happy with the point value of 26. I don't see
Yeah.
any reason to change
How
it.
much was it, did you say?
It was 26 total for that first category.
Okay.
And then I also like, the 25 in that second category is pretty close. And we had talked about how
Right.
redeveloping vacant or underused buildings or properties was a major priority. I think that's very appropriate that that's number 2.
Yes, we felt that was significant.
I might kind of do have a question though, is, for the one we were talking about, to demonstrate the ability to successfully operate, that's, it would be you could have 16, 21, or 26.
Mhm.
So I think the sub-score would be 16 on that presently.
Right, you can,
Or you
If you
could
get
look
it, you
at it,
get
if they get them
16.
all, it would be a 26. So it may not be prioritized the way you're thinking, is, I'm thinking, because if they got the 16 but not the other 10, but I think, or are you saying you would want,
Oh, I see what you're saying. Yeah.
going in, it could be a 16, but you get bonus points up to 10.
Mm-hmm.
So the table point value would be 16, and if you make the other one a 20, then you've made that one over that one because of the sub-point. So unless you want to include the sub-points to make it the priority.
Although, yeah, and I think that was the reason it was put in here as number 1, is
Yeah,
you want all these. This is a well-run, they're licensed, they have experience, all those sort of things. I mean, I think you want them to have 26.
yeah, what he said.
Yeah.
So that would still make it that way.
right, that's what we're after.
Okay,
You know,
Yeah.
and why it's the highest priority thing.
Okay.
Yeah, you can get 16, but you really want to give us 26.
Right.
And so, if you look at the other, at the Berkeley one, they valued that at the 26 points, even though it's subclassed. I think the intent is, in a subclass, you want to earn the most.
there's, bonus points here, you can,
Right,
Yeah.
pick up your bonus points because they're valuable. Yes, yeah.
or as U of M might say, that extra field goal. Too soon?
Oh, goodness.
Nobody likes you.
Oh, touchdown.
Can we move seats?
trying to kind of look at their other list a little bit.
So that
And
number
go.
3, that one is out of order. That wasn't even part of this list. So
Right.
that probably doesn't
Yeah.
deserve as many points as it appears.
Yeah, I honestly, I didn't place these in priority by location. It was more, we wanted the committee to review them all and
Right.
what's important to you.
Serving on ZBA, this one's
I was gonna say, well, let me
'Cause
think
you've dealt
about
with
this.
some of this
Yeah,
in ZBA.
Right, right. Because we do have our sign ordinances, but at the same time, that's the way the whole business of ZBA is to kind of give exception to the ordinances. This would actually serve in kind of giving added incentive to conform to those ordinances, which I think is
Right.
probably a good thing,
right.
yeah.
It's probably not a number 3 item,
Right,
but it's at least in a mid category.
maybe a 5? Do you think?
So when I look at the Berkeley one, just to kind of tell you, when we look at that, it kind of did them as a countdown. And so it's almost you rank them and then just put your point values moving down the line. As opposed to going, well, this one's 5 and that one's 3 and that one's 7 and this one's 7. And oh, that one's 7 as well. It's each one, you know, we go highest points to lowest points, and kind of rank them that way. So, we know that number 1 and number 2 really are number 1 and number 2 in the list.
Did you have a point value for number 2?
Well, it was 25. I'm saying, at this point, let's put them in order and then do
Okay.
our points down the
So we
list.
got 1 and 2 in order.
And then, so when you're looking at the list, what do you think falls next in priority?
Well, just as a starting point, the Berkeley ordinance had all managing stakeholders can demonstrate the history, etc. next on theirs,
Right.
which, you know, I would say that ranks up there pretty high myself.
So you think number 3, Rick?
Yeah, I agree with him.
Okay. And we've said that the next one is kind of low on priority. So we'll leave it alone.
And then,
Common ownership, I think that is kind of, I don't know, but that, to me, that's a significant thing. That, you know, you are either the owner or the leaseholder of that piece of property. Once you move inside the rest of the ordinance, it specifically talks about you are either the owner or the leaseholder of the property. Somehow I go, okay, you have to be one of the two. How do you not be one of those two? And maybe Mr. Gildner has a legal perspective on how that.
Well, one of the examples be one of those dispensaries we went to last week? So the second one we visited, if today's that vote up there, right? And Justin knows probably better than us. So if that goes down, that guy's just renting. So now he leaves, and now it's a vacant suite on that strip mall, right?
Uh-huh.
To me, that's what this is talking about. That if you're not there, you're not just gonna go to the next town, you're gonna put something else in there.
Okay, so this is strictly, you get points for being the owner.
Because, right.
Okay.
That's how I take it,
Okay.
I might be wrong.
We would rather have, our thought process was, we would rather have somebody who's invested in the community themselves
Correct.
instead of just coming in, holding a lease, and I'm
Right.
just here to make a buck.
A
And I
property owner
think
is
we looked at
supposed
it that way from the strip mall perspective,
Mhm.
which is a better community partner. And you can point that and thus make it important.
So we think that that's a good number 4,
I would say.
okay?
Provides physical improvements to the area that makes sense to me as 5.
Yeah. I do not want this fire suppression system to get too far down the list either.
Thank you.
Yeah,
I'm sorry, which one was 5? Or-
5 is physical improvements.
Okay.
so you're saying that should be 6?
Yeah, I wouldn't let that get too much farther down the line.
Okay.
You want that to be 6, you said? Richard?
I feel like that, if you're okay with that,
Yeah, I am.
okay?
And now, I might clarify that one. Notice it says if not required by building code. So what we're saying here is if you're coming in with a 10,000 square foot structure, if I'm correct in saying that, that's required, the NFPA 13 fire suppression system. But if they came in with a 1,800 square foot facility, let's say a testing facility, that's not required by building code. So it'd be bonus points for them to say, you know what, we're gonna meet that standard. Did I say that correctly?
Pretty much. A dispensary would be another example. Typically, that suppression wouldn't be required for that, and I don't know.
Right.
Jeremy and I would love that to be suppressed, but there's a big expense to that as well.
Right, right.
And they are separated from one another by design. So it depends, I guess, is to build on what Chief said. You know,
Well, I like the idea that you're saying, because there are some places where it isn't required. And if they go ahead and put it in, there's your bonus for that type of thing. Now, because when I saw that, I thought, okay, that's an item that doesn't really apply real well to dispensaries.
right.
So it's a bonus to a dispensary if we're looking at maybe 4 dispensaries and one of them says, I'm going to put in a fire suppression system. They just got a few extra points up the list. Is that kind of what we're saying?
It
I'm
would,
seeing
yeah.
a nod out of
yeah. it
Mr.
would be.
Watson.
I think that was the intent of this, is to encourage suppression.
Okay. What you looking for? Oh, I'm sorry. The Village of Holly and the Township of Holly do not have any items on this ballot, so there are no voting needs in this election for the village or the township.
Thank you.
You're welcome. I've handled several of those today, people coming in the building. It is kind of a confusing thing when a lot of other places are voting.
And maybe, while Jeremy and I think this is really important, this really is only going to apply to dispensaries and, smaller, even the testing thing.
If they add it. So a larger facility, like any grow
Will have
facilities, are already going to have this.
Yeah, so maybe it could use less points, because
Okay.
I hate it's a big expense for
Don't
somebody.
burn up our points on something that's,
Yeah, we'd love it, don't get me wrong. But in this, ranking system, I think it's probably a little less.
Okay,
As much as I like it to be number one, it's probably lower.
okay. So we'll hold on to that one for a little while. We're holding on to two of them. Displacing businesses and the fire suppression at this point. And see where we want those to jump in.
Next one might be a good 6, though. The
Yes.
security.
The security stuff, I think, applies to all of those, every facility type we're looking at. And I think to build that in, sorry, Chief McGee, but Chief Narsh's list got,
He bumped me. I
he
get
bumped
it.
you.
I'm good with that.
Well, it does have fire alarm system in there as well on the next one.
So-
I
so we
did
got
that so I could make those guys feel good. So that's number 6?
Yep.
Okay.
Throw
That was
me a
number
bone on
6.
that. Thanks.
And we'll come back and figure out the points when we get there. I think the wages thing is probably a little bit lower on the list.
I think the community, at least the discussion I've seen on social media, heard in meetings and
Mhm.
heard in person, I think the community, what's partly important to them is benefit to the community.
Correct.
So I'd hate to see us drop that all the way to the bottom. I think you might
Right.
be getting close to an area where.
Yeah, I'm
there's-
just kind of seeing if something else comes before it here yet.
Yeah.
Because part of the allure here for this whole thing is bringing good paying jobs to the village. Right?
How, that seems a little subjective to me based on our, and we've only had 2 so far, but there was quite a swing in, in one of the places we visited, it was class place, they paid a little less, but it was first class. The other one that was less, we're
They
tracking stuff.
put more money, put more into wages than they did into
Yeah, and anything else.
basic care.
Yeah, so my fear is how, that does become subjective, I think, because in my mind, it might be different than, clearly different than everybody else's, but still, I don't know how, is $20 an hour good, but 25 gets you extra points, or how do you gauge that or judge that? That's, my fear, and if you're making more than $15 an hour at McDonald's, is that good enough, kind of thing? So I don't know what how do I get a good score on that if I'm coming to the
I
top?
don't think we should be dictating wages to these owners, no
But-
pay.
But you're getting points, so that's kind of the hard
Okay.
part.
I wouldn't like
Yeah, we
that.
don't dictate, none of it's dictating. Some of it's, we're saying this has a value to us.
Right.
And if you show that you're seeking that value the same as we do,
Well, and if you remember in the one place we visited, they were launching a benefits package.
Right.
So, to Councilman Delaney's point, what we, as a committee, all of us together, we really did not want to put, some of these had X number of employees, and that's not fair.
right, and we talked about 30% needed to come from the community.
Yeah, and it's just not
those kind of
fair.
things, and we-
One
this kind
facility,
of generalizes that
Yeah.
concept a little bit, I
Yeah.
think.
yeah,
That's saying, okay.
and it's still measurable.
Yeah, you're not gonna come in doing minimum wage jobs that have no benefits. You're going to be providing something, that's a sustainable, that's gonna attract, good employees for you, basically.
And some of these are extremely sophisticated positions. Some of these, the grow facility managers, these people are experts in their field, and to say they have to come from this region or you have to have X number of these, they're very high-paying jobs, and these people are the best in, you know,
Right.
that business. So it will attract, if it's a grow operation, those type of people automatically, and we're just trying to avoid trying to tell the licensees how to run their business.
And we've kind of watered this down some, right? Because we've eliminated a lot of the things that we've talked about. But again, we've all talked about keeping the village out of court too. And so, you know, is the more defined these can be, the better. Maybe, Mike, is this a problem to you, do you think? Or is this too?
No, I mean, I see some potential problems in the sense, what is the word here, that it's competitive wages, benefits, or educational. How do we define that exactly? But I think if you can control or minimize the risk by assigning fewer points to something like that, it reflects a value to you, but, and it may be important to you, but you recognize something like that is a bit more difficult to grasp, and so you lower the point value.
Right.
But I think what the wording allows to happen, though, is for the applicant, they're either gonna submit a very detailed plan as far as what they're going to offer, or you may get one that's going to submit, we're just gonna pay competitive wages and benefits. Well, obviously, that makes it a little easier for the clerk and her committee to assess the right level of points.
Depends on how many of those supplemental pages they submit on that
Well,
item.
up to 10.
Right, that's a good point, though, yeah.
Yeah, so.
Well, it is, and it-
Right.
I think the wording is fine on it, because, you know, you want a little bit, I mean, you wanna narrow it down, but there still has to be some subjectivity in there. And so I think, you know what, that gives the committee somewhere to go. As long as they judge everybody the same, they're fine.
Right.
That's the important thing.
Yeah. So I wouldn't put it up there that high. Maybe this is about the time to put our community outreach as maybe number 7.
Parks, roads, infrastructure.
Yep. Because when we start looking at the rest of the things, we're going, okay.
Would you then follow that then with the other similar?
Benefits.
Where the council priorities?
Possibly, you think? Number 8, then?
Mhm.
Okay.
Okay.
And then it's also important to bring into compliance a non-conforming use, right? That's pretty high up for us, taking blightish buildings, if that's the right word.
What are you talking about?
The one where proposed development eliminates or brings into compliance existing non-conforming use or structure. That didn't give as many points. They only got 14 points on,
Yeah, and I'm looking at that one as well as the zoning. I think need to stay with a little bit of value in there too, not too far down the list. So, do either one of those, do you feel is more significant than the other one?
You know what I'm gonna say.
What do you say?
Proposed uses do not require any zoning map amendments or variances
Right.
at the time of application would,
Yeah,
would eliminate some headache for me. What do we think?
think if they're one right after the other, it's 6 of one, half a dozen of the other, you know.
Yeah.
So let's make, variance, or zoning map 9, and, non-compliance, non-conforming 10. So we're down to green spaces, stakeholders, wages, building code, and displacement.
Mr. Cameron, I didn't hear the board discuss anything that talks about the green infrastructure.
Right, that's what I said, that's one of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 that we have open yet.
Can we start the bottom up, because that's easier to me.
At this point.
The worst one, I mean, and then kind of fill in the.
Yeah, that might not be a bad idea.
So,
Work our way to the
And
middle.
honestly, you
Sure.
could put the fire suppression as the last one.
I agree.
That's why I brought that up, because I knew you would. I'm just
so that should be 15.
What would that be, 15?
13, 14, 15. We
I think that'd be
17 categories by my
16,
count.
I think. 17?
17.
Fire suppression would be 17.
Okay, somehow I have 5 left and I'm at 10. Okay,
So now you're going for 16.
So maybe does not displace existing operational businesses would be 16, since we wanted to value that so low.
sounds good.
What was that again, Ryan?
Proposed, 16 would be proposed development does not displace existing operational businesses in the village of Holly. That would be second to last, since we valued it so low. Oh, and then,
You had talked about that wages piece. Would this be a good spot for that,
Or do you want that higher?
or higher?
So it kind of leaves the
'Cause you got-
green stuff and the
Yeah.
wages, right?
You got signage.
Oh, we didn't do the sign.
The thing with the green infrastructure, since Holly is built on a swamp, and our storm system is, you know, some of it in areas is lacking, that if we get improvement there, then we're not taxing our
Right,
already
so
storm
that
system.
needs to be
Yeah,
a
that
little
would
bit
be-
higher up in our list. That's kind of why you were bringing it up, I think.
I think it's
Mr.
important,
Watson.
very important.
So somehow I must be missing some numbers in the middle or something. I was at 10, and so put that as an 11.
the green infrastructure as allowed.
Yep.
There you go.
There's one I missed.
So what do we got, 12, 13, 14, 15?
That's sustainable building.
The signs and the
uh,
wages, right?
Sustainable
Where's the
building,
signs? I'm missing signs.
wages,
It's
third
the-
one down from the top.
Oh, that's the one I'm missing. There we go.
I had that at 9.
I'm
Yeah,
cheating,
I
I'm
think
looking at
signage
Steve.
should probably be up there a little more too.
Make that 12.
Yeah,
Down to,
13, 14, and
I think there's only 16, I don't think there are 17, because we scratched.
What we have left, we have
14, 15,
competitive wage.
17, yeah. We have,
Stakeholders.
right, I have 3 left.
Material.
Wages,
Okay.
stakeholders,
Oh,
no, I have, yeah, and sustainable building materials.
I think that one could be next to last, right, with fire
Yeah,
suppression.
15.
Yeah.
But, yeah,
Sustainable
Which one is
building.
15?
Sustainable building materials.
yeah,
Oh,
That's 15, you guys said?
That's 14, you said?
15. So then you got
This one?
13 and 14 left.
yeah.
100% owner stakeholders
Oh, these two.
and
Those could be just either one, just pick.
Right,
At this point.
Because we haven't assigned values to them yet.
in my mind, I'm thinking which one of those is slightly more valuable than the other one. And they, the stakeholders one is not not quite that important, because they're required to do that anyhow,
Mm.
so it's almost like a freebie. Unless they give us lots of supplemental material to go with it. So I would put,
Well,
we're at 13 and 14.
That one is 14 and the wages is 13.
Yep, that's what I would do.
So if you have a completed list, Mr. Kinnaman, could you read those off?
Sure.
Just start from the top and go down.
Okay. The first section, I have a 1. Then application process is 2. Signage is 12. Managing stakeholders is 3. Proposed development is 16. Common ownership is 4. Proposed development is a 5. Building code is 17. Additions is 6. Articulated plans for wages is 13. Community outreach is 7. Stakeholders is 14. Nonconformity is 10. Sustainable building materials is 15. Green infrastructure is 11. Benefits is 8. Proposed use zoning map is 9.
got 100%.
And the last one is off.
Sound like it was in school.
100% right.
100%. Got an A.
Thank you.
So I think, because of the amount of time that we have spent on this, do we feel comfortable maybe letting the committee take that back and actually assign the point values to that? So that we can move on to some of the rest of it, but we know our priority and let them actually assign the numbers to it? Does that sound good?
Yeah.
Okay. Thanks, guys. We knocked that one out of the park. I think that is the biggest hurdle, biggest section of this, even though it's 2 pages. I think it carries probably our most weight, because this is the front door. And so that we have, I think it's valuable to have taken the time for that part. So let's go ahead and start looking at the next section. And we'll just kind of go section by section, and if you do not have any comments or changes, we'll just keep moving, okay? And that goes for anybody, panel or committee, okay? So we'll look at section 1 as the title. I do not have any extra notations in that. If nobody else has any comments for that?
I can't comment, are we calling it cannabis or marijuana establishments? Because in fact, they are cannabis establishments.
I'm wondering, what is the term used in the state of Michigan law
My recollection is it's marijuana.
with the H?
Yeah.
So actually, they use it interchangeable, and so that's why one of the definitions says marijuana either spelled with a J or an H. So those
Okay.
are interchangeable. I think we can be consistent if we choose to.
Use that, and I would suggest if we did that, that we also added the term or cannabis.
So
Actually, it's in the definition
it is-
when you go over here.
it is- when we get to that section, I have a suggestion, something the
Okay.
panel talked about.
Okay, so does that, are you comfortable with that? Because we can tell them to find and replace if we want a different spelling or something, but, okay. Section 2, legislative intent is kind of pretty standard. I think that goes along with the state law. Then when we start looking at definitions, I take it that those A, B, and Cs, Mr. Gildner, are pretty much just clarifications from the state laws.
Yeah, I'll defer to Jerry, because we talked about that, and the two go hand in hand.
Okay,
Well, and so our thought on this was, as the panel talked with Mr. Gildner, is that maybe instead of listing these specific set of recommendations and having these be unless amended, we could simply adopt definitions that are defined in the state law, in the Public Act, and then as those are updated at the state level, ours would automatically update and would not require the council then to actually physically take motion to update the ordinance. And so we could just adopt the definitions by reference from the Public Act.
okay.
And then they would automatically update every time there's a.
Would that be for this entire section?
All of definitions.
All definitions? You know, that kind of entered my mind, was like, no place in here does it say, per the state, you know, law or whatever, you know, whatever.
Yeah, I think to the extent any of these, and just looking at them at quick glance, I think they're all defined elsewhere. So we can simply refer to those as opposed to trying to, you know, reinvent the wheel.
And the other thing the committee really wanted to express the importance of, the more you can mirror state law in your ordinance, especially something that's complicated or technical, the less issues you're going to have defending that.
The less likely we have to come back and tweak.
And so we mirror as close as we can the state act on definitions, and if there's a legal, because in matters of law, the period's a period, a comma's a comma. And if we have the exact state law definitions, and there's quite a few when you look at the state act, so we adopt those and move them over by reference, as Jerry stated, then.
So, Mr. Gildner, are there a few of these that would be specific, especially like when we look at the last one, village, specifically stating the village of Holly?
Yeah, that's it. If you would leave it up to the shareholders on this side,
Okay.
we can parcel out those that we think need to be defined. The only one that jumps out at me right now is village.
Okay.
I think all the rest we're gonna find
Yeah.
in one statute or another.
And the terms that are used throughout the draft ordinance are the terms that are used in the act, correct?
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think
As
that's
much
the
as
one thing we'd
possible,
want to
anyway.
be able
And
Yeah.
to
That's what we want to
clarify.
strive for.
Right, and probably where, if you find one of those one of those things that ends up in the ordinance that isn't defined in the act, then we probably have to list that one.
Exactly.
Okay? It makes a lot shorter paperwork for keeping track of, too. Okay?
So real quick, does A, B, and C take care of that? Except for the home for the village?
I think to a large extent, we may have to tweak some of that language, but for the most part, I think it does.
Okay. I think A, B, and C are kind of just defining the acts, the state laws, what they are. And so then we just kind of make another line or something. You'll know what, you get what we're looking for.
Yeah, I understand, yeah.
Yep, that's good, okay? Let's move on to section 4, licensing. The only thing I saw, and it's kind of looking at, when you read wording, you go, okay, what does this really apply to? I know the inference is that it applies to all, but not clearly defined, is in kind of the middle of the paragraph where it talks about having paid all applicable fees. It comes after talking about, the ordinance as well as the state of Michigan. And I'm not sure if we need to clarify that that comes from both, that it specifically states fees from the village ordinance and the state act, rather than just saying all fees.
Are we still on 4, Richard?
Yes, I'm in the, if you see about where I'm at, right there.
Oh,
Well,
yeah, okay.
I don't see any harm necessarily in adding it, but they're not gonna get to you unless they're approved by the state anyway. So,
Yeah.
they're gonna have to have paid those fees. So I think that really limits it to the
Okay.
village imposed fees. But if you wish to add state and local fees, you're not hurting anything necessarily.
Yeah,
Mike, would this be the part where, because I could be wrong on this, but I think it's a community can charge up to $5,000 annually for the application, should that be here? The amount that the village chooses for renewals?
I might answer what I would think with that is, later in the ordinance, it says that the village council shall at time to time revise or, determine those amounts. And if you put a number in, then we're locked to that.
By resolution, do a
By-
fee schedule? Okay,
Yeah,
Yeah, that is later on.
separate it, okay.
I wonder if it'd be possible, since a $300 fine, I wonder if that could be moved up to $500.
Thank you.
And who would give this fine? The local police, or is there somebody that is assigned to do this?
Be the village.
Be the village
Who
law
with-
enforcement?
Who within the village,
so is this considered civil or is this considered, code?
Well,
Hmm?
wait.
well, this talks about imprisonment, in addition to a fine, which means it'd have to be a misdemeanor. If it's, just a fine only, then it's a civil infraction, basically.
Okay,
I think the prison time should be lowered down to 30 days, and not 90 days seems quite excessive. me, but I would increase a fine up to $500, $800.
We're limited to $500.
Okay, I would like to see it increase to 500.
Yeah, and the 90 days is standard. 30 is included as a lesser included of 90, but all the, our ordinances are, 190 days or 590 days. That's just the maximum, but that's standard,
Yeah, I mean, so that's up to,
yeah.
if you have a person or entity that commits one singular violation, I mean, that gives the judge discretion not to issue the 90 days, and so
Okay.
typically
Yeah.
less.
And that's exactly right. The amount of time is not gonna be up to us anyway. That's gonna be up to a judge. We issue the citation or the, whatever, the complaint, then it goes to court. A judge decides the ultimate penalty.
Do they also decide on the dollar amount on that penalty
Yes.
too?
Yes,
So the judge would.
It says up to, so if we say up to 500, he could still do a $50 fine.
oh, yes. Mhm.
But the
But-
judge couldn't go over 300, right?
No,
Or is
it
that not
says
how it
up
works?
to 300, that's as
Right.
far as he can go.
But
Yeah.
if this says up to 300, the judge can't go, well, I'll give you a $400
That's
fine.
Right.
Right,
So we can max that at 500.
right.
And it sounds like Mr. Powers is more inclined for that. What do you think?
I don't have any particular problem with it in and of itself. I'm just wondering how much of a problem operating without a license would,
I think it's gonna
Potentially
be
be.
rare
yeah,
in the structure that we're under. I think it'd be highly unlikely.
yeah.
But, I don't know if this kind of cuts down some of your black market. Is that kind of hitting the
Actually,
black
this,
market?
this won't be rare. This is like really, really, really common. And under state law, I'll be honest with you, the county of Oakland and the state of Michigan is not in the business of prosecuting marijuana. Period. We can walk in with a grow operation and, our prosecutor doesn't want to look at it. What this does is it gives us a local ordinance that it's a violation of our ordinance to have an unlicensed facility. So we might have more success in that route.
Right.
But these are the people that have 50 plants in their basement growing and they're not care providers. They're well above the 12. Technically, they're bootlegging against a lawful Michigan taxed regulated organization. It's bootlegging.
I agree with you, I think it's going to be far more than we realize.
It's already going on.
Yeah.
And so this gives us actually another tool in my belt, because under state law, I might as well just knock and talk and say, please knock it off, because presently they're not prosecuted, and I can submit them all day long and they're rejected. So it's unfortunate. But now we have an ordinance that says you're violating our licensing act.
So what do you think about the 300 or 500?
590 days. That's, you know.
Your
I mean,
maximum
There's a
opportunity.
huge profit margin in violating this.
Okay.
I mean, yeah, I'd like to see that because that's,
Yeah.
it's happening.
Well, I would also like it to be a simple citation issued by a police officer, building inspector, whatever the case might be. Not
Yep.
dragging him off to jail, do anything like that. Here's a citation, pay the fine, go to jail.
Well, it'd be a citation because it's an ordinance with criminal. So it's a citation. The judge would determine when it goes into court whether they go to jail. We wouldn't arrest them at the time. Yeah, we would just simply issue the citation, and then when they go to court, it's up to the court. If it's a jury and they find guilt, or finder fact is a judge and they find guilt, then they're gonna assess penalty.
So,
The judge will.
so if this is like the fourth or fifth time, that's when the judge gets mad, right? And says, now you're going to jail, or now you're paying the max. right?
Hopefully,
They only do that in the movies.
yeah.
I love that movie.
You love that movie?
But the
It's not on
9,500.
the Hallmark Channel either.
No, $9,500 is standard. I mean, that's, all of our ordinances are really 93 days, $500, but 90 days, $500 is standard ordinance language, and it's almost all ticket and release, so this is perfect.
Okay,
It's another tool for us to use.
okay,
I might also suggest here that in addition to that, to give you even more flexibility, add some language which says a violation can be pursued as a nuisance per se. What that means is that you've got the ability to go into civil court and ask that a judge shut down an operation. For example, if you've got the bootlegger out there, if it's a $500 fine, he may come in and pay the $500 all day long and continue the operation. All a nuisance per se does gives the village the option in those rare cases where you go in and say, we need something more. We're not looking for money. We're not looking to put him in jail. We want the operation shut down.
institute a cease and desist.
Yes.
That's the most valuable thing I've heard said since I woke up this morning,
Cease and desist.
that we have that civil power to go in and have a judge look at it as a nuisance. That's really good. That's actually really smart.
So, add
My time here is done.
Add civil power to that, you can put your wording in that, then if
Oh,
we
yeah,
say,
yeah, I can-
let's do that,
That's a good one.
okay?
yeah.
It is.
Section 5, composition of local licensing authority. And the first part's pretty much, I think, by the state law. I didn't really have notes in that one, so if anybody has notes in that one. We're okay with that one? Move on to section 6. Application for license to operate is kind of part of that whole process we spent the first hour and 15 minutes going through. A couple of things that I saw in this one. This one's your distances. This just talks about schools. It does not talk about houses of worship. I don't know, in that initial part, we had schools or houses of worship.
That is addressed in section 8, though, specifically for religion.
It's a separate section.
Yeah.
I don't think it was
Buffering
also
requirements.
added here, though.
Oh,
Yeah, because if it's not there, to me, it feels like it's
Not priority.
a conflict by absence kind of thing.
We can add that.
Okay.
Or take it out of 6 and add that to 8. What's already there?
Yeah, somehow I think it just needs to be another sentence that, or, you know, an and houses
Clause,
of worship
yeah.
or something. Or houses of worship and public or private schools kind of thing, something that, so that it matches. And in C, this is, no place in this does it say anything about within the village. So if you have no more than 5, grow facilities, or no more than, no person shall hold ownership or interest in both of these things, is that just within the state as a whole? Or is that that within the village, they cannot hold both things.
Well, so this ordinance that you're looking at, I mean, it pertains to the village. So, I mean, that's what it would pertain to. I mean, you're going to have the possibility of many operators having facilities all over the United States, really.
Right, so, I feel like if it doesn't say within the village, that it leaves that nebulous, that you can only own one or the other.
Well, we can't regulate the state,
N-
so,
Right, but I think it needs to verbalize that, because if it doesn't, it's a confusing point that,
So if you just add within the village after micro business,
I think, that to me, I feel suffices. Go ahead.
So what you're kind of envisioning is we could end up shutting out, effectively shutting out all marijuana businesses because, everybody has some other establishment someplace else,
Mm,
right?
Right, it's just, looking at that, are we applying it? I don't know, when I read things, that's the kind
This
of,
is the problem when you have two school teachers on one committee. So, but we can add that, in,
Yeah,
within
just-
the village
Does-
of Holland.
Mr. Gilner, does
Something-
that make sense?
Yeah, oh, yeah, yeah.
Well, and I was looking at that last line, hold ownership in more than 5 or in more than one microbusiness. Some of these might have 100 or 200 nationally. But I
yeah,
think
and
it's
so
implied
if we're
village.
just saying that, I think it just adds clarification that keeps us from being,
Yeah, D.
E, I had a question about, have we hit that 24-month in the state laws yet?
Yeah, because this was.
I think we've already hit that, haven't we?
Mhm.
Oh, yeah, 18.
Yeah, it was 2018,
So
so.
E is expired, basically. It's not necessary.
I think it's a safe statement. You could just strike that.
Strike E. Okay. I have nothing else in,
in G, it should be NPDES permit, not M. N, as in Nancy,
And like Narsh.
yeah,
Okay.
What page are you on?
and G, section G.
Oh.
Kept looking at that, going, doesn't that sound right?
I don't even know what those letters mean, so.
I don't either.
National Pollution Discharge Eliminations.
Okay.
okay? Anything else before we go on to 7? 7's a short one. Permitted locations. Now, is this where we should have that table that we said we liked? There was a table.
Remember which one that
I do not.
So I think maybe permitted locations may be different than number of licenses allowed. Because I think permitted locations, you're just talking more zoning regulations.
Okay, so is there another section where that fits? Because it's not in.
so that was in Frederick, and it was, if it's the one the one I'm thinking, there was authorization of facilities and fees.
Yeah, which I think in this document, maybe section 11 on page 9, if you look at that, one, it may fit in there, maybe as a paragraph D, where you could just put number of licenses.
Yeah,
allowed.
allocation and annual fees. I think that's where we need that, that table that gives us the categories, the zoning that they're allowed in, and the number, that are permitted in each section, or in each zone. Or total licenses, I guess.
D.
Do you wanna tackle that right now while we're talking about this section, the number of each? Or do you wanna come back when you're done with the document?
Let's come back, because I have a couple other notes before we get there.
Okay.
Okay, so 7's okay, we can move on from permitted locations.
Is this it, Jerry?
Okay, 8, buffering requirements. And, we've kind of had that discussion, a little bit. Now, the door-to-door, and I'm okay with that, but we need to say what door. Is it front entrances? Is it any entrance? If we're saying door to door, is it, from the front entrance of the establishment, or
That
Any
could be
entrance.
easily added in the definitions as one of our, door-to-door would be the primary entrance of
Okay.
the facility, but that might be, for legal purposes, a definition. And then when you read it,
yeah, does that, Mr. Gildner, does that seem like a plausible
That
place
makes,
to put
that
that?
makes sense. That would be a good place to put it.
Okay. Anybody else have anything in section 8?
No, that makes sense.
Okay, section 9, I think that's pretty much just spelling out the state law.
Yes.
So, once again, is this a section, Mr. Gilner, where we leave that as it is, or do we want to say, or simplify it to say pursuant to, current state regulations or law?
I don't know the thinking for adding it. I think it's redundant. It's in state law. I don't even know that you need to reference it at all, but, then again, I wasn't part of the discussion about it, so I don't know.
Did anybody on the panel have anything to this section? Or-
No, it seemed to be consistent in the other ordinances that we reviewed, that it was contained, so we did contain it, but obviously, it does nothing more than just mimic what is already included in the state law.
Right, so, if the state law, because as I was reading through that, I thought, well, what if the state law changes to 18, or if it changes to from 12 to 6, or 50 plants, then we've got to come back and fix our ordinance. Or we can leave our ordinance that says 21, can't we? If the state law says 18, can we stay at 21?
No, not necessarily. In fact, it's probably gonna be preempted in that instance.
Right.
Subject to state law. So the question is whether you keep it, knowing it's largely redundant, maybe you're just trying to make it clear, or I think you can get away with taking it out completely.
Okay, because we are at the beginning referencing the state.
I'm looking at this, and Jerry mentioned something that was in a lot of other ordinances. We do that a lot in ordinances that mirror state law when it's stuff that we want our public to understand is important. Like when we talk about if we adopt OUIL cost recovery or OWI cost recovery, we start talking about the elements of OWI, and we do that, right? The reason I like it is it's a new act. Anybody that's going to look at this act, it just talks about the really important parts about the act. And I guess education is such a component for me, for our community to have, they're looking at it again. Oh, okay, our ordinance, I know it mirrors state law, but a lot of people don't know what state law is, but they will see our ordinance because they're gonna go online and they're gonna click that ordinance. And so they're gonna see that 2.05 lenses, not more than 15 grams, 12 plants. I think that helps define the whole marijuana thing, because people are gonna click on our ordinance, they're not gonna click on state law. So I think that's why other communities did that, because this is the nut, the meat and potatoes of it. So I would really kinda like to leave that in, if it's not, problematic.
I'm okay with leaving it in.
Yeah, because if state law changes, well, it
Then-
changes and our
Right.
ordinance is just out of date, but that doesn't really mean anything because state law preempts local
Right, and well,
ordinance.
then we come back and,
Yeah.
that's why we have Mr. Gildner on retainer, is to, come back and remind us on occasion that we need to revise these things, right?
I'll try to notice that if the state law changes and save you the money you'd pay Mike. I'm great. I'm just saying, I'll throw that out there.
Yeah, I know, I saw Mr.
Sorry, Mike.
Walker's look kinda go, money.
Oh, you did, yeah.
Okay, so we're good with that section then. Section 10, lawful activities by growers, processors, transporters, or retailers. I did not have anything in that, and that's probably a state law redundancy thing too, I would assume. Okay, so we come to section 11 that we want to put in our box. And we'll work on that and probably call it a night, because we're about 10 till. Frederick was,
Section 1.4 was where it was in Frederick.
yeah. Okay, now that's not quite the thing that I'm referring to. There was one that was an actual table.
So the city of Walled Lakes, as we looked at their model, so they have a table, I think, like you're speaking of. It wasn't one other ordinance too, but this was one of the ordinances that committee identified as a good one to look at. If you have that
Three in
in
Walled
your
Lake.
booklet, it's page 2 of 11.
Or 3.
Yes, that, right, that's what I've got circled here. That talks about fees, location, total number, the type of facility. So if we put that, section in, and clarify, they just have non-residential listed in these other sections, and we had non-residential, or do we want to name commercial, or say not in? I think it's easier to almost list and say specifically where we do not want it than where we do want it. Thoughts from anybody?
No, I mean, I think you're correct. In at the last meeting, we discussed areas that we did not want it, and that was on residentially zoned pieces of property.
Yeah.
And we also said that we did not want it in the commercial business district, which basically for the village of Holly is Oakland Street to the railroad tracks on South Saginaw, and then again, Junction, Battle Alley, and Broad Street. Broad Street between Junction and Maple.
Right, basically what we consider historical downtown.
That's correct, yeah.
Yeah.
So I think, and really, in the ordinance, we did specify that, you know, not permitted in residential and the CBD, commercial business district.
So do we change that wording there to maybe from location to, not permitted? And just list the, you know, the residential and CBD, and in the grower one, we list everything except industrial?
Well.
See
so-
how I'm looking at that? Either we say where it's permitted or where it's not permitted.
Well, so the growth already is not going to be permitted in any other district except your industrial pursuant to the current zoning ordinance. So it's not permitted already because we have the zoning that says no agriculture except in the industrial district. Now, of course, an entity or a person would have the ability to go to the zoning board of appeals if a piece of property was not zoned industrial, but rather commercial, but they had a large enough indoor space if they wanted to do a growth, but that would be a very specific.
But they'd
case by
lose
case.
points for that.
Right.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right, they would. But they still may choose to do it.
They may choose to do it, yes, but they would lose points for that. So, maybe in location, put only in, for grower, only in industrial. And in the other ones, not in, residential or CBD. Do that kind of wording. It's page 3 of 11 in Walled Lake. I don't think we need to necessarily get real hung up on it. Just, you know, when you're putting it together, we know where we say yes and where we say no already based on that. So what we really need to talk about is the number of facilities that we are considering. Or that we are going to allow.
I think for a village of 6,100, I think 2, maybe 3 maximum would be far enough. And also, if you start allowing 5 or 6, that
Mhm.
means the other ones can be driven out of business by the other ones, and we don't want that. We want them
Right.
to be successful.
Right. I am comfortable with 2.
We're talking about growing facilities?
No, we'll
Or-
I think he's,
Retail.
you're talking about
on the retail,
Yeah.
which in this list is considered provisioning, correct?
Right.
Yes,
If you say up to, say 3, but you just want to have 2, but you have that ability, is that allowable, or does that make it?
You'll have that many applicants.
But you don't have to approve all the applicants. If you say up to.
If they qualify point-wise, you do not have a reason to decline them.
Okay. I didn't know if you said
Right.
up to, but if they do qualify, then you have to give it. Okay, that's what.
Yeah,
And if you're thinking of the district where provision applies, kind of just sit and think about that. Can you picture, I think 2 you could, if you couldn't picture 3 fitting in all of those, are you going down Grange Hall Road now? Are you, they had 2 in the same plaza
right.
up in Lapeer, and they were both doing well. And I'd asked another, I can't remember who we were talking to, and they said, yeah, they're at 9 a.m. When the doors open, they have their customers waiting. So that was 2 in 1.
Right, but the second gentleman that we talked to, his comment was, there's oversaturation, because when I asked the question, what in the ordinances there was probably the most prohibitive or difficult, and he said the number of facilities.
Yeah.
Made it too difficult. Somebody's not gonna survive, he said.
Yeah. And that's what I'm trying to, when I look at that chart, is how much industrial do we have, and knowing that it's 10 or 20,000 square feet, 15, you
Right.
know, to run a Class C grow operation, or such, you know, how much, does it take for a safety compliance? I mean, is that gonna take, do we wanna drill a little deeper into, I think we kinda get what a, safety compliance or a testing facility, you know, that could be almost anywhere, and they're small, and there's no real product. Transporter, what type of facility does that require, and how many big trucks
Right.
would
And I
that
think
be? Do we know?
when you listen to the conversation in the community, the provisioning centers, the retail locations, is what comes to mind, number one. And that I think is where the tension is on individuals, you know, where there's the perspective of having them or not having them. And so I think that's when you just drop this out there, people go, well, not here or not that, or, you know, only so much, or and when we look at our makeup as a community, you're either on the northern 2/3 of Saginaw Street, or you're on a very small section of Grange Hall. I don't think we have a lot of space to put in multiple, you know, everybody already talks about we have too many car parts shops, you know? It's the same concept.
I got a quick question. This Walled Lake, how many people do they have? Are they,
Just over 7,000.
so they're a little bigger than us. So what they did here is they did 3 pretty much for everything, for each grower, processor, all that. But retailer, and Jerry probably knows better than anybody, they have 2 in their C2 district and 1 in their C3. So it looks like they're trying to spread theirs out, probably based on zoning. I don't know.
Yeah, well, yeah, I mean, so basically the districts are the same, they're just not contiguous,
Okay.
and so they're separated, and so one is smaller than the other. And so they just looked like they limited it to 1 in that smaller area. But I think maybe what you were talking about, Richard, is because our target area is not large geographic anyways. I mean, the village is only 2.8 square miles anyways.
Right.
And it's really confined being on North Saginaw, North Holly, and Grange Hall. So, I mean, definitely no more than 3. I mean, but, I mean, I think 2 is reasonable also, really, whatever the committee recommends.
And it's something that can be modified. You know, if we go with 2, and find that the layout and the market could sustain a 3rd one, the village council can always vote to modify the ordinance to go up. It is a lot harder to say, oh, I think we overdid it, and try and come down, because then somebody's gonna lose a license. And who gets hit with that? So,
Whoever has the worst attorney.
Not to mention, it would make it that much more competitive, and it is my logic sound here. We would be more likely to attract, you know, in that application process, a dispensary or a provisioning center, whatever you want to call it, like the first one that we visited in our research, which
Right.
was kind of top shelf, you know, you could
Right.
say.
mhm,
It's a quality establishment that will succeed and that will last,
yeah,
and not just be in and out.
yeah.
and I think that's why we put so much emphasis of the design, because that first place was, you didn't even know what it was, to, you know, what we've been hearing over these last months, versus the second one with the green thing and all
Yeah.
that, you know.
So,
I would
do
go
you
with
feel like
two,
starting
yeah.
with 2 is a good,
Yeah,
and so the others, 3, 4, I feel like, you know, the other, especially like your transport is probably just needing, you
Yeah.
know, like a garage to house your vehicles in, kind of thing, you know? Your, well, processor is a little bit more of a, to me, almost industrial as well.
it seems like
I
grower,
see.
processor, and even transporter, depending upon how large an operation it is and how many, you know, vehicles you have, that takes up a heck of a lot more space than.
Yeah, Mr. Watson.
I think Mr. Delaney's spot on with that. With your transporters, with our ordinance, we don't allow outdoor storage. So it's only allowed in the industrial district with buffers and fences. So, you know, if we do get a transporting company in here and they do have 12 trucks, do we necessarily want to see that in the commercial district on Saginaw or Grange Hall? Or would we like to see that tucked in our industrial district, following the industrial standards?
I think your current zoning is gonna require it,
So,
right?
If
And
we
I-
make it in the
so
industrial.
in
not
transport, do you think we should change the wording or the locations to industrial only? Or
Well,
a smaller operation could be in commercial?
I was
Not
gonna,
sure.
I think if you leave it like it is, your smaller operations are gonna be able to operate in commercial, the larger ones are not going to, just because you already have ordinance in place.
Okay,
And so it'll just become an enforcement issue.
and I was gonna kind of frame, because I think everybody might have a different idea of what that truck looks like. For the most part,
Plain Jane van.
is there, yeah, these small little white transporter vans,
Sprinter vans.
sprinter vans are usually
Yeah. Those little Ford vans or,
yeah.
Whatever.
You won't have a line of semi-trucks that look like gravel trains. They're
Do
gonna
they
be.
have signage on them, or no?
Yeah, no, yeah.
No, I
No
mean,
signage.
serious, no signage.
I
It's
think by state law,
nondescript.
they're not allowed
Yeah,
to be
Joe's
marked.
Plumbing. I mean, you don't want it to, you know.
Yeah,
Stick out.
But yes, they're usually just the white, plain, small transport vans, that size. Um,
Well, yeah, based on what they had back there, you can get quite a few of those. in that
So-
van,
Right.
we'll leave our location stuff alone with that, because it still keeps it out of residential and out of downtown. So they could be in commercial or industrial, based upon how they fit our zoning. Okay?
And I'm sorry, you said 3? You were,
I don't know.
we're still talking about that.
We're talking about the places with the trucks, with the little transport
I'll be
vans.
talking to the, trucks. I don't have any problem with 3. I would think there's business with 3, but
Well, they will service a large area,
right.
you know, so you just become a hub. That you have a few employees and,
I mean, this is a commercial, right?
23.
What's your feeling?
It's Gray's industrial.
I'm okay with 3. Once again, it's, you know, if we start
Make
with a
2
lower manageable number, you can always go
2
up.
industrial.
You run into a lot of trouble trying to go
Or
backwards.
do you want to push them all industrial?
And so if we start with what we think is a doable number and find that the market can sustain more in our area, then you can always amend this and open it up for an additional one. And sometimes, you know, you're talking about your lower number gets you a better applicant. If you've got 3 and you decide, you know, we can go to 4, that one is going to, gonna really be cream, in essence, you know, could.
Yeah.
So I would just say something to consider while you're talking about the number of licenses is, I mean, I don't think you're gonna have a tremendous amount of people piling on in some of these categories. I think transport is one of them, because like you said, they're gonna service a larger area anyways. But I wouldn't artificially, limit us low, because if you do, say, if you do get 3 or 4, not that we're doing this for the money from the state, but remember, the more licenses that we have, the largest percentage you get of reimbursement from the state.
Plus our proximity to freeways makes us a
That's
good
why I
help.
was thinking
okay.
location.
So what is a reasonable number you would recommend?
There's, I think, another factor too, is if there are operations that are gonna, you might end up with grow operations, larger grow operations in the township. So the transporters are probably gonna wanna be as close as possible to the manufacturing, processing, and retail locations, because that's what they do. So if you have, if you anticipate in this region there's going to be a lot of interest, then that's gonna drive transport to this area. And they're gonna wanna be in police agencies. I'm not saying the township's not, but there's a reason why we have more banks in the village than elsewhere. We have a police department, we have security. So that will kind of draw that to this region, the fact that we're policed and safe. So I could see transporters going, ooh, village, we're close to groves, we're close to, yeah.
Yeah.
2375.
Yep.
So I could see a transporter business kind of liking the idea of being in the village for that reason. But they're going to want to be close to where there's sales and grow, because that's going to be the
So
business. So
what do you think is a reasonable number? 5?
Do we need to limit it? I mean, because it's just gonna be vans, right?
Well, they're just gonna be vans. I mean, it's probably not, I wouldn't wanna go too low, but you probably do need to put a number. I mean, 5 is the number that I had mentioned earlier.
So are we comfortable with 5
I'm okay
transport
with it
things?
because we don't necessarily have to give all of them up. We can move up from there. If the business is there for that, we can, it's easier to go up than take away. So, yeah, I'd be okay with 5.
Okay,
And you may not have that, because if they look at it from a business standpoint, and there's already 2 transporters out here, and there's not enough business to put 3 and 4, as Councilman Powers said, that's gonna be driven by the amount of business, and that could grow down the road, so.
right, yep. Now we're at, I'm just kind of going up the list here, up the processors then. So, help me with what types of things completely fall within processors.
That's the edibles, right? That's the edibles and the.
So, following the definition,
Right, that's where I'm
means a
headed.
licensee that is a commercial entity located in this state that purchases marijuana from a grower and that extracts resin from the marijuana and creates a marijuana-infused product for sale, and transfer and package from to a provisioning center.
And if you remember, in the first one we looked at on our tour, the size of the room that they'd bought that equipment, and that was gonna be their processing center.
So we're probably saying that's industrial, because it would be manufacturing, that it would not be in commercial.
Well, I think
What
that,
about where you get, I'm just thinking like Marika's Kitchen right there, that's commercial, right? And they're making, I mean, that's not really a restaurant, it's more of a takeout, but then they had the salsa place in there, so.
well, I mean, I think if you look at the true definition of our manufacturing and processing, it currently, it's all in the industrial district, you know, with the exception of a restaurant.
Because I'm picturing the facility, and I could be wrong, but the size of the facility that we were looking at would be not much bigger than this room with the type of equipment, it'd be taller roof. But it's not a lot of product because that's down to an ingredient size and making the candies and the chocolates and it would just depend on how big, but that room was that one piece of equipment and then the tables and the storage, refrigeration and things. But the process itself, I guess it would be by definition, is that manufacturing.
Would you tie that to the number of growing facilities? Because probably, like we saw, some of them would want to do that there under the same roof, right?
But it wouldn't have to be. I mean, if there were other grow facilities in neighboring communities, I mean, they could bring the product here to process.
But if you have a grower that wants to produce, manufacture, basically, then they apply for a second license
That's correct.
Right.
to actually do production.
You could have, no, actually, you could have X amount of licenses in one facility. Some things you can't have is like the testing, that can't
Right.
be in the manufacturing.
Testing and transport have to
Yeah,
be
separate,
separate
but you can
ownership.
have, I mean, there's one facility, there's, coming to Orion, I think it was insane, the number of licenses out of that one building, which again, for revenue, it's $5,000 annual renewable,
And a
per
percentage-
license.
And a percentage.
And a percentage, and that's just from one location. So, and that could be potentially here. And again, I don't know if the industry, the need would drive it. So if you had two processor, or two retail, two or three manufacturing, and they each want to do their own processing, did you want to option that way, or depends on what type of business they want to run, because now it's a linear business, it's more, or a vertical business, it's more,
Right.
I think, better for the community if you combine them all in, you're getting more back to the community in the same space. The more you can put into one, licenses into one facility.
So I think we're looking at, first of all, location, and are we okay with leaving it saying that it could be in commercial?
So, and I think it would be pursuant to applicable zoning, and so as we are discussing here, I'm thinking back of Olympus Fair Salsa. And so they were that type of manufacturing business for salsa. They were allowed to operate in a commercial district, or, yeah, that was commercial, based upon special land use. And so there
You
are
can't have
mechanisms
these two
within the
and
zoning
these.
ordinance
But you
to
can
allow
have grower,
uses to
processor,
continue.
retailer,
And so I think wording
microbusiness.
something like,
Yeah, but you can't add
all except
those
in
can't be
the,
the same. Yeah. I'm sorry.
if we talked about verbiage that said, all except the residential and
And the CBD
and the
district?
CBD pursuant to applicable zoning ordinances. And so that means, yeah, you can have them in those areas as long as you meet the requirements of the zoning ordinance. And so agriculture, according to zoning ordinance, goes in manufacturing. That type of manufacturing for the byproducts may be able to occur in the commercial district if it meets the other requirements in the zoning ordinance. So I think if you stay consistent with, out of those two, residential, CBD, pursuant to applicable zoning ordinances, I think that's kind of your catch-all that gives you a little flexibility. And I like that number 5 again. I mean, truthfully, I think of no number, but 5 for our size is probably the right number for that, in my mind.
Actually, if you look at that, section, where we've been pulling this from, that Part A right above that basically says that. Does that kind of, if we include A in that, Does that
Oh, yeah, the one that you-
kind of do what you're talking about?
Yes.
Okay. So, you want to say 5 again? So
5
we have
process.
a number in there? Because I feel like we're better to have a number than not.
I agree,
Yeah,
you need a number in there.
I would go with 5.
Go with 5? Okay, when we come to growers then. And we think about our industrial spaces. And we have a few undeveloped, larger parcels that could be, industrial spaces.
And you actually have some existing that, I know it's less points, but you have some existing that may, again, I think Jerry coined, we don't always know the viability of an existing business, and if approached, and they fit that criteria, there is some existing out there that could be low-hanging fruit.
You want to go as high as 5 for grow facilities?
I think I'm trying to get a feel for the whole room. On 5 for grows, or should we be a little lower than that?
I think I would just defer to Brian just a little bit, only because the grows are the ones gonna have the most impact, possibly.
I mean,
On
that facility that we
infrastructure
looked at in
itself.
Orion, I had a lot of concern with the floor drains, and, I mean, that was a 10,000 square foot facility, and I think they were gonna triple in size. So, I mean, 30,000 square feet, the problem is talking with the wastewater supervisor and going to some different seminars and stuff, is we don't have any categories for what we call an IPP, or industrial pretreatment. There's no categories yet for growers. So my concern when I seen that facility is you have an open drain and a guy mixing chemicals up in an open 55-gallon drum. Now, he's being careful because there's a lot of people around, but, you know,
It's
they get in a
easily
hur-
slopped.
yeah, they get in a hurry, they hit that, they hit one of them grates, one of them tires spins the wrong way and flips over, and we got 55 gallons of pure chemical going down into our sanitary system. So we got a slug of stuff that's gonna disrupt our, you know, our process. And so I think that if we set it up, I mean, we can have as many as we want, but I think we need to make sure that we get them in some kind of industrial pretreatment program, or some kind, that we make sure there's safeguards in place that, you know, because they're least intrusive. I mean, that was a nice building that had a lot of things to it, and we have the space for it. But my concern is, once they get inside, if they don't do best management practices and we end up with slugs in our system, it's gonna outweigh the benefit of having that, you know.
So are you feeling that we should go with a lower number of facilities, at least to start with? And see how the system bears that?
Yeah, and it also,
Because once
see
we
how the
move to
rest
a
of the, as these facilities pop up, you're gonna have the one incident that, you know, defines what, you know, what's gonna start
Right.
setting standards for stuff. Now, do we want to have in Holly? Obviously not, but,
Well,
there's already enough facilities out there, I think, that if they mirror the best management practices, it will be okay.
Yeah.
So it's a matter of, you know, do we think we can get away with 4, 5? What, you know, do we have that ability? I mean, they
right,
didn't seem
I'm
real.
wondering when we start maxing our current infrastructure,
Yeah.
and then we make everybody in town happy because we get a new bond to expand our system for a
Well,
grower.
It didn't seem like they were discharging a lot of waste,
No.
but they're
Right.
using a lot of water, so I mean, that's
Right.
not a bad thing. So, it's just the waste part is what scares me. The water part that's real easy. I mean,
Right,
Did we cover that, though? I know Brian and I talked quite a bit about this, and we even put that in the pass-fail.
Yeah, that was that NPDS thing, and meeting all
Right.
those things.
They're gonna come in the door, and I think Brian's gonna review that. We made it both a pass-fail and then a point on our sheet as well. So there is a checks and balances, and I know Brian's gonna be looking close at that.
Yeah, just because it's new and we're
And we
hearing
have a
different
processing
stories.
plan, a lot of cities don't,
Yeah,
so it matters for us.
yeah.
So should we run with a more conservative number of maybe 3 or even 2? And how they work on the system or what we see going on, once again, if we feel we can handle it, we can go up.
Well, I mean, even like the chief said, if you put in there 4 or 5, but that seems like the magic number we've been looking at, they're gonna get a pass-fail right off the bat. So they're not even gonna get to the second page, per se, of the application with a failing thing. So as long as we review it properly and they do what they say they're gonna do, there's no harm, no foul, and we get to fail them right out of the gate, so we don't even have to go through too much of a process with them. So I don't think keeping it low, artificially high is gonna make a difference in that, because we do have that ability to pass or fail them right out of the gate. So as long as they come through and they know that, they show us a program that, or, a safety plan that they're gonna adhere to, and we do inspections. And with, we only have one IPP user, it's Holly Plating, we do an annual inspection. So, if we get them set up on that and say, hey, this is part of the deal, this is what you need to do, and we can go through annually and look at this and monitor it, and we have the ability with our sewer ordinances to go in and check those things out anyway. The biggest thing, they're gonna be using a lot of, fertilizers, so phosphorus and stuff like that. We can test that real easy and know that it's pretty obvious it's coming from one of these facilities, so.
It's a lot of water. That they would be paying the village for.
So Brian, are you comfortable then with 5, as long as you have the regulation?
Yeah, because I mean, right out of the bat, we have the ability to say, based on what we're seeing, this isn't gonna work, so you fail. So go back to the drawing board and come back with something better. Or here's our ordinances, or we wanna see some kind of plan just based on what you're bringing forward to us.
Do you think we have the space to handle 5?
Well, I mean, I think when you look at the industrial properties that you have, you just have to think of the different buildings in the village, which are zone industrial. And currently, you have a few factories or warehouses that are sitting vacant, which I think would be attractive. And then, of course, you have the undeveloped properties up in the north end, which may require rezoning, but a couple of them I could think it would be appropriate for the rezoning in that area.
What you feeling?
I think 5's fine. We can always give out 2 or 3, and then as time goes by, if we need to give out
I-
4,
I
if
wanna-
the is here.
Something about saying caution on, if you say 5 and you have 5 applicants that make it through the pass-fail, you almost cannot deny them.
Because you'd just be inviting
Well, they
a
still have to
lawsuit.
get to the 70%. They still have to get to the 70% though.
Right,
Well,
So you got one more, area to get them.
right.
Which, not the right way to say that, but,
Yeah.
to make sure they.
I actually think, though, to Richard's point, I don't think getting to the 70% is gonna be a high bar. I think 70%, they can get to that pretty easily. It's getting all the extra points to get closer to whatever the max is.
right.
100 or 110, whatever it is. And also to his point is, if you have 5 licenses, you have 5 qualified people and 5 that are approved by the state, then you're gonna
Then
issue 5 licenses.
you're gonna issue them.
Well, and I think also to the point, if they're, a lot of these businesses, what they're going to do is, they're looking at the landscape, they're looking at the playing field, and they're looking at the diamond, all of it. So before they even sign up to play, they've probably got a purchase agreement on a piece of property. So if there are 5 parcels to purchase, you're probably going to have 5 licenses. I don't think anybody's going to come into the game without already knowing where they're going to be, and they've already made those arrangements. So you could say, well, we're worried about the applicants. They're not even going to apply unless they've already got, they already know where they're going to go.
Right.
So if we have 5 parcels, you could have 5 players. But if you don't think you have, 5 pieces of property that would fit, at this time anyway, you might not have 5 applicants. You'll have up to.
But of your 5 applicants, 3 of them could be 85 to 90%, and 2 of them could be 71%. And you're stuck with your 71%ers.
If they have, yeah, and if they have a parcel and they have all of that, they're
Right.
going somewhere, right? Then they're still gonna invest that money, but yeah, you're correct. We're setting the standard at 70 and hopefully 70. And remember, what I really like about this evaluation system is the really, really important stuff is pass-fail coming out of the gate. So you know you've got a competitive player. You've got a quality player. Chances are they're in the business already multiple times, multiple places, just by our pass-fail system, excuse me. So a 71% with somebody compared to somebody that's might still be a really good business because of that front page.
And it's occupying a building that may be vacant now.
Yeah.
I can think of 6 industrial buildings that are vacant or close to vacant right now in the village of Holly. So, I was telling that one.
Which goes to our desire and the residents' desire from everything that I've heard to address blight through this.
I don't want us to be short-sighted, looking at fixing some of those things and it's kind of like being penny wise and pound foolish, that we're basically setting ourselves up to almost take anything just to fill a vacant building. Where if we are a little more cautious, that we work towards night and day type of establishments. And once again, there's nothing wrong with raising a number, but if we've got a higher number and we get people who are squeaking by in our approval process, down the road, you go, man, I wish we could have held on to that and had somebody better later.
I think you get a lot of the people that are trying to get in first, they're gonna be the better ones, because that's where the money's at in the upfront now, instead of a year down the road when the market's saturated, and then say, oh yeah, Holly's got 1 license, let's try to squeeze in with those other 4 people that are already successful and already established.
Can we talk about 4?
I'm okay with 3. I mean, if that's what you think would be best for 3, I'm okay with that.
Well, the one thing about this particular facility license that you're talking about now, growth, is they're only going to embark in that venture if there's a market for it,
Right.
as opposed to retail, where retail, if you put out 10 licenses, you're probably gonna have 10. Then we're gonna try and make it where growth, they have to have some place for that product to go to. And so I don't think it's gonna be quite the frenzy that you might have if this was true retail.
It's a huge capital investment, as I understand it, too.
Oh, it is, for sure.
So
And-
you're limited by the amount of the capital investment that they have to put forward.
And if you have grow, you'll draw transport. So then it stacks your licenses to what you want. You want to have, you're allowing this many, and the more grow you have, the more transport are going to be drawn to this region because you're going to have. So that meets kind of the food chain, if you will, of the product. Then you're going to want to have some regional testing facilities, and those are kind of the placebos of this whole thing. And again, it's the same percentage, it's a license for the capture of the taxation and also for the licensing fee. So you're kind of creating the self-licking ice cream cone.
I'll use that.
In the fire business somehow.
Or the knife in the block of ice.
Does anybody know what the ratio, generally speaking, of grow facilities to transport facilities is?
I don't.
One for every 30. For every grow, there's also retail. They transport between both of them.
Oh,
So
sure.
There's probably there's less than there's only 30 so in the state maybe
Mhm.
total, and there's over 500 growers currently and 350 adult use stores.
Okay.
So 30 to 1, or 1 to 30.
I don't know, I'm still leaning towards 3. Just, I don't know, I'm not a risk taker on this one. This one, and you know, it gets to council, and council can go, I think we want 5. And they can do that,
Mhm.
you know, it can go there. I feel more comfortable with 3 personally at this point.
You got it. Three's good.
So safety compliance is the testing centers. And that's our other one that is kind of like the transport, so it's kind of easy to just put our 5 in there.
Mhm. I'd say.
Are we gonna put a time limit on this meeting?
Yeah, this was the section we were gonna get through and quit.
Oh, was it? Okay.
Yes, yes. So, we will, see if those sections can be brought to us. Really, if you wanna look, I do not have really notes in the rest of it. If somebody has a quick note or something that you noticed in the rest of it. What was this one section you guys, the whole paragraph is highlighted? Was that an addition that you put in section 14, top of page 14? Licenses generally.
It was probably just something we were studying that we wanted to make sure we talked about. So,
What it made me think about was the one ordinance that a couple of them, I think, actually said that any change, change of location, change of ownership, any of that is considered a brand-new application. I don't know if I liked that it was, you know, you get in and then you change everybody, you know, you have a big shift over, and it's like,
Yeah, I think it covers that, though, in this, if you on the fourth line down.
of the
towards
thing that you had.
Yeah, each village operating license is exclusive to the village licensee, is non-assignable, and shall not be sold or purchased.
Okay,
So I think
Yep,
that's
that-
why that was highlighted, because
Yep.
it met what the committee
yeah,
was looking for.
that I think fulfills that idea. Okay, then if we do not have anything else in the rest of it, what I would say is, we are ready to have a draft, created that we then have a review meeting to go over that as a fourth meeting. From that meeting, then make our recommendation to council. So,
And then we will also provide the merit point system as well. We'll bring that back
right,
to you.
yeah, all of the things we talked about, put the document together now for us that we've talked about, and we'll come back and do a final review then.
So, just because there's not a lot of change, but there is some change, and Mr. Gilmer will have to do some work on it. Does the 23rd work? That will give us an extra week rather than a 2-week cycle.
Sure, that works for me.
It's a Tuesday before
What day of the
Thanksgiving.
week is that, Derek?
That's a
Tuesday
Tuesday
before
again,
Thanksgiving.
before Thanksgiving,
What, excuse me?
Tuesday
Yeah,
before Thanksgiving. Yeah, that looks good to me. And there are no other things showing up on my calendar that would require this room, so should be easy.
Okay, very good.
Okay, no objections? We are done for tonight. We are adjourned. Thank you, guys.
Steve has the proposed signage.
Or not, I should do the circle.